We're on. Hello, folks. I think we are on with a few of you right now. We're going to get started here in a few minutes once we get a few more people in here and give everyone a chance to settle in. Hey everybody, it's Niko here from Redox. We just spent the past few minutes drawing this amazing logo on the whiteboard behind us. We're going to give everybody another minute or two to log into the Crowdcast. While we're waiting, there's a chat box that I loaded up on the right side. If you could take a second and type in what you're looking to get out of the webinar today. We're going to go through some topics, but I want to make sure that I cover what everyone wants from there. It looks like it's literally been our team putting in stuff there, so feel free to put some real questions in the chat box. Additionally, at the bottom there's a big button to ask a question. If you ask a question on that during the presentation, it'll queue up to answer at the end, and we'll go through all the questions at the end to make sure we get everyone's questions answered. So give me a second, I'll pull up my presentation and we'll get going shortly. Okay, guys, we're gonna dive into it now. It looks like we have 28 people on the webinar. So how does my screen look to you? Here, grab that and move it over. We're just getting the screen looking good.
Oh, yeah, press that thing.
Okay, cool. So you guys should see my presentation right now. So we're going to take a few minutes and kind of go over what healthcare integration looks like in this age of value-based care. This is what's on the agenda. I want to talk through the adoption of electronic health records. And if you're like me, you may have called it electronic medical records in the past, but there was a time about, I think it was like 6 months ago or so, when the ONC switched health records to, well, medical records to health records. So now we're using EHR instead of EMR. I'm hoping that the entire industry shifts with us. So I want to go through kind of what the adoption of the electronic health records was like, what spurred it, and then talk through the increased demand for interoperability, or I14Y as the nerds like to say, and why this is a new topic that has really kind of become a highly demanded piece of functionality from EHRs. And then talk through, as a cloud-based application, what integrating with an EHR looks like. Then we can talk a little bit about Redox and how we might be able to help with that, and then go into a discussion. So as I'm going through this, feel free to continue dropping questions into Crowdcast, either on the chat box or on the Ask a Question section on the bottom, because I think the majority of this conversation will be a discussion around the questions that you have, and we can do this in a fully transparent and open way. Looks like we have 35 people on the line now or so, or 28, to actually have a good discussion with. So we should be able to have a good crowd discussion around this. So hopping into it, when you look at technology adoption, everyone knows the technology adoption curve looks something like this. This is what they teach you in school, where we have sort of this adoption cycle. With EHRs came about in the late 70s, early 80s was the first electronic health records that were developed, and very early on, academics and researchers started to adopt the technology to really start bringing data into their health systems. The first EHRs were created to streamline the billing processes. So this was in a time when a provider would bill for each service that he provided to a patient. And so the initial EHR functionality was really built around, how do we say, okay, what service did the provider provide with the patient, and then how do we streamline the billing process so insurance can pay for it? It wasn't until the late 2000s when EHR started reaching that early majority section of the market, and smaller providers and smaller health systems started saying, how do we actually start using this data that's being stored in the EHRs to improve patient care while streamlining for billing? It was at that time that we had an introduction of policy. So the High Tech Act came about in around 2010 and introduced meaningful use, which was a federal government, a federal subsidy to adopt the electronic medical record technology. It came in 3 stages. The first stage went live in 2011, and that was really to make sure that people were consistently capturing the data that an EHR stores. So things like the medical history for patients, the past encounters, what medications they're taking, what allergies they have, their family history, social history, all this sort of stuff. So the first stage of meaningful use was really, let's make sure that hospitals and providers are adopting EMR technology, meaningfully using them to capture that data. Stage 2, which came about in 2014, was saying, now that we've captured the data, how do we actually start mandating that we're changing clinical processes to improve patient care? So the way that these subsidies worked was, it said, if you reach these metrics, then we will give your practice or give your hospital money for using the technology appropriately. Eventually, they turned into penalties. So stage 1, for instance, after 2012, turned into a penalty to say, if you're not capturing data in an electronic health record, we're actually going to start penalizing your health systems. Meaningful use stage 3 is something that is supposedly coming this year, but it's not defined yet on what it actually is going to, the specific dates around it, and what all the metrics are going to be. So we're looking for that coming down the pipe. But a lot of the emphasis around stage 3 is now, how do we actually improve outcomes for patients? So metrics won't be around, that you are capturing data or that you're changing your clinical processes. The metrics for meaningful use stage 3 will be around how well are your patients doing from an outcomes perspective. So it's something much harder to measure, and something that really needs more access to the data within the EHR. So over this time period, we saw a lot of EHRs really become kings in their adoption. When the government mandates the use of any technology, that technology, will be purchased by these organizations. And I wanted to give a sense of what that landscape looks like right now. So on the hospital side, this is 2015 numbers on the EHR vendors that are being used by hospitals to achieve meaningful use. So CMS receives reporting from hospitals on what vendors they're using to actually report on their meaningful use numbers. And so you can see here the primary EHR vendors of choice: Cerner, Meditech, Epic, Kessner, CPSI are kind of some of the big ones out there. The majority of these, if you look at like the top 5, really the top 5 vendors own the majority of the market in the hospital side. If we look at the outpatient side, so these are the hospital, the provider groups, we see a much more distributed group where it's like the top 10 own the majority, the top 10 vendors. And here we see some of the same names that provide sort of enterprise-wide solutions like Epic across, but we also see a lot of outpatient-specific EHRs like eClinicalWorks and NextGen, some of these smaller guys. One thing I wanted to point out here is that from an EHR standpoint, it's very few EHRs are actually cloud-based. On the outpatient side of the house, there's only a handful here that have any market traction at all, and that's a big implication when it comes to EHR integration, that most EHRs are not in the cloud. In contrast, most applications that are being developed right now are cloud-based, are centrally hosted. So that's a big piece of how integration will have to work is going down from the cloud onto the health system architecture landscape. So I want to paint a picture of what the architecture looks like at a health system network for an on-premise EHR like Epic or Cerner or one of these other guys. So within your health system network, you have your EHR running, and it sends mostly HL7 messages transactionally out to an interface engine. So anytime something happens within the EHR, like a patient is admitted to the hospital, or a medication is ordered, or a procedure is done or documented on, this produces HL7 messages, which are sent off to this interface engine. That interface engine is designed to really bounce those messages off to other systems within the health system network. So your lab information system to receive all the lab orders and then result labs back to the EHR. Your radiology system to provide sort of radiology-specific workflows to the radiologists. There's a ton of other systems that a health system will deploy within their network that need to integrate with the EHR. And so this is your traditional EHR integration will happen on-premise through an interface engine using HL7. So if your software is going to be deployed on-premise in a health system, if you're going to install something on a server at a health system, this is likely the way that they'll ask you to interface with the EHR. They'll say, our version of Epic, is installed on-premise, and if you need patient demographic information, we're going to give you an HL7 feed that has that. And it'll be your job to figure out how to decipher that HL7 feed. Some other systems that health systems deploy from their EHR, they'll start having web servers. So there's a lot of discussion around FHIR and where that's going to live. It'll be a web server that the EHR communicates with that will allow for JSON versions of data to be sent outside of the health system network. Additionally, currently every health system has a web server that deploys CCDs, which is a continuity of care document. And this is how EHRs communicate with each other between different health system networks, which we'll get into here in a second. Additionally, we have a reporting server, which is where all the historical information about patients go. That's typically tied to a data warehouse where they run analytics off of it. So a lot of systems will be contributing data into that reporting infrastructure. So the other mega trend that's happened over the last 5 years or so is the shift towards value-based care. This is something wildly important that ties into how our infrastructure was adopted, the health system infrastructure was adopted. Really the shift towards value-based care can be summed up as an alignment of incentives between the various players within the health system. So within healthcare, you have your hospital group, your provider group, and your insurance company that pays for care that's provided by both of those organizations. With the Affordable Care Act, and shift towards ACOs. We're seeing payment models start to shift towards, instead of paying for services that are provided by that provider or by that hospital, we're seeing them being paid for based on the ailment that a patient might have. So a patient might go into a hospital for appendicitis, and rather than getting the hospital getting paid for an appendectomy, they'll actually start getting paid for treating appendicitis, whether it needs the appendix removed or not. So this shift towards value-based care really aligns incentives between the providers, the outpatient facilities, who are treating, specialty and primary care, and the hospital systems, which are providing the acute care, to say it's now within our incentives to just provide the best care possible for a patient, to make sure that the patient has the best outcomes, regardless of the amounts of tests or medications or procedures that need to be done for that patient, because the amount that is getting reimbursed is going to be the same for all of those organizations. So we see new business models start to emerge, like accountable care organizations, which are insurance companies that have health systems and provider groups associated with them. So their bottom line profit is tied to the quality of care. So integrated delivery networks operate similarly, and even Medicare is now shifting towards bundled payments, which are more along the lines of this value-based care paradigm. So this is absolutely driving the need for interoperability. To put it into perspective, our fee-for-service model over the past decades has contributed to a lot of waste in healthcare. This is a report from 2012 that was looking at 2010 numbers, estimating the amount of waste that our healthcare system has, and it said $765 billion is estimated to be wasted every single year in healthcare. And what they mean by that is we can reduce healthcare spending by around 30% and not have any adverse effects on patient care or outcomes because of this waste. So this is, really from an entrepreneur standpoint, this is a huge bullseye on places where we can be more efficient. So they broke it down into a number of different buckets, but when we're talking to software vendors in the space who are looking at using data, they're really trying to tackle one of these buckets, whether it's unnecessary services provided. So oftentimes this bucket of unnecessary services is because we have services that are provided multiple times, redundant services by two different organizations that didn't talk to each other. So if you have two health systems that a patient is being cared for at, they might order the same lab tests or same procedures done because they didn't know about it going on at the other organization. Inefficiently delivered care has to do with doctors providing services that maybe nurses or nurse practitioners could provide, services that may not have been needed at all. So there's a bunch of different buckets here on where this waste comes from. But as we look at applications using data from the EHR system, they're typically trying to tackle one of these areas and reduce some of the waste within the health system. Interoperability really started with this classical interoperability use case of a patient going from one health system to another health system and maybe to another specialty group, and saying, how do we tie these health systems together to share information about that patient? So about 10 years ago, we saw the emergence of a health information exchange that helped solve this problem. So rather than health systems all communicating point to point with each other, we can all communicate with a health information exchange and share information about a patient. The idea behind the health information exchange was that it would store clinical information about a patient in perpetuity, and if you show up to health system number 2, health system 2 can query that HIE to pull data that health system 1 and health system 3 might have contributed to that HIE. So this was a really great model and promising in the sense that if every health system is contributing data to the HIE, then they could essentially pull data from it, and care continuity can be achieved between the various health systems who are contributing. The challenge here that we saw was the HIE business model. We saw challenges in the viability of that model succeeding to provide this functionality from a long-term perspective. They oftentimes try to charge the health systems to participate in the HIE, which created perverse incentives because health systems wanted to consume this data and ended up having to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to participate in the HIE, and saw that the benefit that they were getting out of it wasn't really worth that licensing fee. Additionally, there's some perverse incentives in that if you're a health system being paid in a fee-for-service model and you realize that a lab test has already been done at the health system across town, then you're not going to order that lab test for yourself, which means that your revenue that you may have gotten from that patient starts to diminish. So because of a couple of these market reasons, the HIE model started to not be adopted as quickly as possible. Additionally, it didn't help out applications. So within this infrastructure that I showed above, the application layer wasn't represented at all. So if you're making a cloud-based application who is trying to consume data from EHRs, it would make sense that an HIE would be the place to go to receive that data. But HIEs never got to a point where they provided an application layer so you can actually consume data from the HIE. So the people who actually could use this data, turn the data into information that would be valuable to patient care, valuable either directly to patients or to the providers who are within the workflow of providing care, never really saw the benefit in the HIE model. So what happened was, cloud-based applications who are developing an application, when they wanted to hook up to the health systems and their EHRs, they had to enter into sort of a wild mess of interoperability. So the diagram that is kind of loosely drawn out here is each health system, with their EHR on premise in the basement of their health system, will have different ways to interoperate, and that's we have different colors coming out of each of those health system networks. And for your cloud-based application hosted centrally up in a cloud environment, you'll need to communicate with each of those health systems in each essential dialect of their interfacing languages. And taking a step back and looking at the ecosystem across all the different cloud-based vendors and all the different health systems, there's this terrible web of inefficiency that comes about because of the decentralized nature of interoperability from an application's perspective. To dive a level deeper and look at kind of what the infrastructure looks like to do integration with various health systems, your cloud-based application will likely need to establish connectivity to the various health system networks that you work with. That's typically done through a VPN connection into that health system. And then once you're into that health system network, really kind of navigating whether your data is coming out of the web server that the EHR might be connected to or their interface engine, or eventually once FHIR gets put in place, how you consume data from their FHIR servers. So there's that strategic aspect of how do you actually build and maintain those connections, and then how do you translate the various standards that are customized at each of those health systems into something that your application can use. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done on translation of the data, as well as maintaining the connections to each of those health systems. So applications that we've worked with that have done this at scale, we've seen that around 1/3 to 1/2 of their development resources are spent connecting to various health systems, like establishing these connections, building translation layers to take in HL7 and CCDs and custom web services, and mapping those to the schema that your application runs on. So a terrible waste of resources, because every single application has to do that independently. And that's where we see really Redox coming in. So our application layer really acts as an HIE in the perspective that we're connecting up to various health systems and standardizing their data feeds coming out of those health systems. So whether the health system is pumping out HL7 or a custom web service or CCD, CDA models or FHIR standards, we're translating them within our engine to consistent JSON models making those available to cloud-based applications over web services. So the way that our infrastructure looks like is we'll sit between your application and the health system networks that you're communicating with. And it's our job to maintain those VPN connections. We actually maintain multiple VPN connections for every health system network that we're installed on. So we have some redundancy and failover if one VPN goes down. Anyone who's managed VPNs in the past knows that they're kind of pesky and do go down based on health system outages and other things like that. So it's our job to maintain those over time and make sure that we have them up and running. Once we receive data from a health system, it enters our virtual private cloud where we're processing that data. So we actually set up a separate health system listener for each health system that we're working with to keep the data separate and compliant with HIPAA standards. We queue that message data and then we process it in our core servers. And what we're doing in our core servers is translating it based on essentially 3 levels of configuration that it goes through. So first off, we say, what is the standard that we're translating from? So is it HL7? What type of HL7 message is it? What do we expect that to look like? That's kind of the first layer of processing that we do to the message to understand kind of where data is going to lie in that message. The second layer of processing that it goes through is what EHR vendor is it coming from? So we know that HL7 coming from Epic looks different than what it looks like coming from Athena or coming from Cerner. So it goes through a level of processing to standardize what the EHR vendor does to it specifically. And then the third layer of processing that we take it through in our core servers is what has that health system done specifically to the data that changes it, that further customizes that standard. So what sort of custom visit types do they have in there? Or maybe they're putting data in one field that's normally another field. So we abstract away all of that complexity based on the health system customizations, based on the data standard, as well as the EHR customizations to that standard. And then we present that to an application over web services in a standardized format. So essentially taking off all of that infrastructure and processing and monitoring from the applications that we work with. So that's a little on Redox and how we solve this application interoperability problem and how we technically go about processing messages from one end to the other. And this generally works bidirectionally depending on the message types that we're looking at. So we can also take messages coming in from your application and pass it through the system in the other way, queuing messages outbound back into the health system. So kind of a high level on how Redox does that. This is a quick overview on our team. We're based out here in Madison, Wisconsin, hence the Packers swag that you might see in the picture. That's me. But the majority of our team came out of Epic. So we're in Madison because we all used to work there. Out of the 16 of us now, 12 of us used to work at Epic. So really much a background on building out the EHR landscape from the Epic perspective. Our jobs at Epic on the integration side was to hook Epic up to other systems, to the lab systems, and as well as other EHRs. So our background, although we come from the Epic environment, we very much have experience working with other EHRs and connecting up applications to other EHRs. Since we started Redox, we've grown to around 300 applications who are integrating on top of our APIs. And essentially using us to process data to the health systems that they sell into. So we essentially talk to software applications all day long and help them figure out their integration strategies and how to scale that to the health systems that they're working with. So that's kind of a quick background on Redox. I want to stop there and kind of jump into the questions that you have. I saw some popping up as we were going through this, so we can kind of take off the formal part of the discussion and go into some of the questions. So I'll start down here with the questions in the crowdcast. So I'm tackling this first one right now. So can two unrelated companies, unrelated to Epic, use you guys as a middleware connector? And if so, would that enable a user to offer our services to other third parties after that? Kind of a confusing question. So let me try to clarify that. So two unrelated companies, unrelated to Epic, use guys as a middleware connector. So absolutely, you can use us as a middleware connector. Well, really that's the core product that Redox provides, is connecting cloud-based applications who are unrelated to Epic or other EHR vendors, connect to those EHRs using that infrastructure that we discussed. Once you're connected into Redox, on the left-hand side of that diagram that I showed, you can connect up to Epic as well as other EHRs at the health systems that you're looking to sell to, as well as other application vendors who are also connected to it. So one of the use cases that we've seen come up recently, which we found really interesting, was that there's actually use cases for applications to connect to Redox, not only to connect to the EHR, but to connect to other cloud-based applications. So for instance, if you have a telemedicine application and you provide kind of a video conferencing service from a doctor to a patient, you might team up with an application that has a really great scheduling product to help schedule visits in your telemedicine platform. Those are the types of things that you can do through our platform, through an integration between two cloud-based applications. So that's another kind of use case for two unrelated companies to connect. Let's see here. Next question. And feel free to vote up and down questions on the left-hand side too, if you think any are more applicable. Let's see. So I'm going to take one from the chat. So a question from Sean said, "Can I get my own EMR/EHR through your API?" And that's an interesting question. So we don't have an EHR essentially that we like we don't operate any EHR. So if you're looking to get access to an EHR, there are various EHRs that you can get access to from a Playground environment, like Dr. Chrono's one that you can kind of sign on and get access to right away. There's a few others out there where you can get access to an EHR. If you're looking to do testing with integration, we have a dashboard where you can actually log in and do integrated testing as if you were connected to an EHR. So if you create an account on Redox, you can go in and send data as if you were connected to an EHR. So you wouldn't necessarily need to have an EHR on the other end. So it's kind of a chicken or egg question, right? Like, how do you do integration if you don't have an EHR to play with? That's exactly what our dev tools were designed to allow you to do, is log on and test out integration as if you were connected up to an EHR, and exchange data as if you were connected to Epic or something like that. A question from Daniel: "How easy is your API to use?" That's a good question. So you can actually go in and start using our API on our software right away. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to go into our dashboard and show you, if you want a quick demo here. So I'm just pulling up Redox. Whoa. Sorry, internets. Let me make this full screen for you guys. Okay, so from our dashboard, you can log in and create an account with us. And once you're in there, you're able to kind of go in and see some of our documentation on how to use the API. So once you're in, it kind of the documentations allow you to go in and configure your application to receive data from us. The first thing that people like to look at is our data models. So if you're looking to exchange data with the EHR, the list of available data models and what triggers those data is here on the left side. So a lot of clinical information comes in our clinical summary. So medications being used, other things like that. I'll go down and show you some examples of what the JSON looks like here. So this is an example of an advanced directive for a patient and what that JSON model looks like. So this is a do not resuscitate advanced directive. or maybe something more common here, a medication list. Looks like this. So we have a sort of codified medication list within the system. And from the perspective of how to actually start interacting with the API, within your dashboard, I'm just going to go into one of our sample applications that we have here. Sample org. So you'll have your own organization that that you work with, and it'll look something like this when you get logged in. So within the dashboard, you're able to go in and configure your destination. So if you're going to receive data from the EHR, you configure a destination. We give you an Evening Earth destination to start out with as an example. So you'll see this within your dashboard. Within the settings, you're able to go in and actually configure your endpoint. So this is where you would set up your endpoint for us to essentially have webhook connection to. You add a token, and then once you verify it, you're actually good to go on from a testing environment on sending data back and forth to your application. I can show you what this endpoint looks like real quick. It's just essentially a list that we made with our free Heroku app to display various messages that are coming out of the application. So obviously you would set up your own endpoint, but you can use this Heroku endpoint as for testing purposes. So within our dev tools here, you can go in and choose what data model you want to send. So if you're looking at scheduling and you want to see what does a new scheduling message look like from a health system, we have some tools here to say, okay, let's take a new appointment for a patient named Timothy with Dr. Slate at this general hospital, and actually send it to your application. And you'll see that that's the scheduling appointment that I just sent, go across the API. So it's fairly easy to get set up within the application to actually start interacting with the API. So go ahead and you can log in there and start doing it. Just wanted to show that to answer that question there. Let's see here. Okay. Let's see. The next question here from Matt. I'd like to know if there are any challenges with HIE integration from different EHRs. Oh, where'd it go? I think that question might have been, oh, it just popped down. Yeah, so integrating with HIEs is really the challenge that the HIE brings on itself. So the Health Information Exchange organization, their challenge is to integrate with various EHRs. We have actually worked with various HIEs to help them do that integration. So it's a matter of maintaining connections to the EHRs, much like a cloud-based application would. But from an application vendor's perspective, there's not really an opportunity to connect your application to an HIE. The HIE really provides that functionality to connect various health systems to each other, but not to any application that's trying to use that data. Okay, so I'm going to answer Jeff's question up here on how long does it take from signing a contract with Redox to actually having a connection go live with a health system that is on Redox. That's a great question. So the way that this process typically works is once you've created a Redox account and have hooked up your API to it, you can use that API connection and that integration strategy to really get your health system customer, to essentially create an integration strategy to get it approved by your health system customer. So Redox is not helping to, we're not helping to essentially like make the sale for you at the health system. So you still have to go into the health system and make that sale. But we will facilitate that integration strategy once you have made that sale. So essentially the way that the process works is your developers will go onto our platform, check out our API documentation, and get the integration going, figure out the strategy. We love hopping on calls with you at that point to figure out and learn more about your application, what you're trying to build, what your workflow is. And then from that, we have what we call a pre-production account where we'll actually work with you to develop that integration strategy. So this is where Redox starts charging. It's $75 a month. We'll sit down with you and put together an integration plan that you can bring to any health system that you're working with to say, this is exactly the scope of my integration and how we're going to do the integration with your specific EHR, what interfaces we're going to need to deploy, how long it's going to take, who needs to be involved on the team. So it's a pretty comprehensive integration strategy that we help to give you to bring to that health system. Additionally, during this time period, we'll hop on the phone for like sales support. So when you're making that sale to the health system, we'll be able to be on the phone if they have technical questions. We can hop on and kind of talk through that integration strategy with them to get that project approved. The idea is we want to, we're on the same page to get the project approved, so that way we can start to do the integration project and get the implementation going. Once the project's approved, the typical timeline to get the integration up and running, if the health system's already working with Redox, if we already have another application that's up and running there, that integration can go very quickly. So within as little as 1 to 2 weeks, depending on the data that you're looking to exchange. So we'll stand it up in a staging environment from the EHR staging environment through Redox to your staging environment to do testing. That's typically a week process or so. We'll move that into production where we watch it go. So kind of like a soft go live in production to watch messages flow through and make sure that the workflow works in a production setting. And then we have a user go live after that. So that's if they're already hooked up to Redox. If they're not already hooked up to Redox, we add another 2 to 4 weeks to that process for us to standardize the data coming out of that health system. So that process will start by us establishing connectivity with that health system, and then receiving sample data and mapping that over to our standard. And then we'll move into the process of moving into staging and testing for your application. So long story short, the implementation processes from the health system perspective are typically on the order of 4 to 6 weeks if we're not already up and running with that health system. And if we are, then it can go a little bit faster than that. Okay, let's see here. So can we use Redox? I'm going to answer this question from Doug. Can we use Redox to connect to the dev sandbox that Epic offers? Great question, Doug. Epic has a sandbox at each health system, but they do not have a developer sandbox that application can connect to without a health system being involved. So there's no developer sandbox that Epic offers. They do have some documentation up on open.epic.com, but there's not like a place where we can actually like play with Epic's user interface and send messages across, like a lot of other EHRs have. So what we did with Redox is we created an environment that I showed a little bit earlier where you can send messages as if they were coming from Epic. So you can actually run an integrated workflow as if you were connected up to Epic using our developer tools. And then it's once you've made that sale to the health system, we can go in and hook up Epic on the other side at that health system. So one of the challenges with doing any integration is like getting that developer environment and sandbox up. And unfortunately, unless you work at a health system or have a really good relationship with them, it's hard to get a sandbox or staging or playground environment up from an Epic perspective. Unless you're kind of already started that implementation project. So our dev tools allow you to do that. And if you're interested in using dev tools to create an integrated workflow, we can definitely hop on a call and talk through that and kind of figure out what data you're looking to exchange and how you can use our dev tools to essentially simulate a sandbox environment. Let's see here. So let me answer this question from Jeff or Geoff Parker to get a sense of how mature Redox tech is and see how it compares to other integration approaches. That's a great question. So a little background on Redox. We've been around for about 2 years now. Our first iteration of our integration environment was deployed in January of 2015. So we're looking at about a year and a half or so now of our technology being used. To date, we're connecting up with various health systems that use EHRs like Epic, Cerner, eClinicalWorks, NextGen. There's probably another half dozen in the pipeline that we should be going live with in the next couple of months. We're processing tens of thousands of messages a day and doing it in pretty near real time. And message processing takes around 400 milliseconds to go from the left-hand side to the right-hand side and be processed through our systems. So the difference between our technology versus other approaches is first and foremost a centralized approach. So in the architecture that I showed earlier, all the messages that Redox processes go through our servers that are hosted on AWS, which was another question that I saw here that I can dive into a little bit deeper. But with Redox, each health system that connects to it, we're processing messages through that same server in a centralized fashion. And so what that does is it creates a networked integration strategy. So you can literally connect to Redox once, and then every health system that you sell into, it's our job at Redox to connect up to the other side of that. So we'll go in and implement that integration on the other side to get the health system on the network as well. For health systems that are already hooked into us, Redox is able to use that same infrastructure over and over again, and this drastically reduces the amount of infrastructure costs to integration. So we're able to amortize those costs across our various customers. And what that does is it allows the product to be much more economically viable for smaller applications. So we can do this a lot cheaper. So that's kind of the core from a differentiation standpoint. We're not trying to just create more point-to-point connections. A lot of other integration approaches out there will hook up your application to a health system, but it'll do that in a point-to-point fashion from your app to that health system. What Redox does is do that through this middle layer that makes it more efficient for the entire ecosystem. There's a lot of health systems and a lot of applications out there right now that could benefit from a centralized approach. So we're definitely the furthest along in providing a centralized model to do that. Along with that, the next follow-up question that comes from that is, well, from a security standpoint, is this okay? Is this a model that health systems are comfortable with? And I saw Darla's question there on if we're storing any patient data, and that's definitely related to this topic. So we are simply a conduit in this. We take data from the health system, translate it, pass it to your application, and vice versa. And then we purge the data. So we don't store any protected health information long-term. We purge it after 48 hours. So most interface engines store data for some amount of time for troubleshooting purposes. So we do store it for 48 hours to have it there if your server went down and you need to re-trigger messages or anything like that. We have it for 48 hours, but we purge it after that. From a health system standpoint, they're quite comfortable with using this model for integration because if data is leaving their health system network, it's going to be processed in the cloud somewhere, whether it's yours or ours. And so we simply become part of that chain of data moving out of the health system and being processed. From their perspective as well, using a single place to process it actually reduces the amount of risk exposure they have. So if they're connected up to 12 different software vendors and they're all doing that through a centralized message processing system like Redox, then it's allowing that to happen once instead of 12 times. From a business associate perspective, I see John asking a follow-up with a BAA there. Obviously, in order to consume any of this protected health information, your application will need to have a business associate agreement in place with the health system that you're exchanging data with. We normally are a subcontractor. So in the relationship, the health system is the covered entity. You're the business associate that's consuming that information, and we're simply a subcontractor to you, passing that information along. So Redox does not have the rights to use this information for any analytics purposes or any sort of data storage and big data type things. Although that'd be really cool, from a liability perspective, we like to limit the amount of exposure that we have to data. It allows your application to be installed faster, and really drops the question of like, well, what's happening to this data? All of that specified in the BAA that you have with the health system, and our subcontractor BAA with your application is really limiting in the sense that the only purpose that we have to touch this data is to transform it and then send it along to the other side. Along with that, the rollback, resends, and error handling. John, I wanted to but do you sign back BAAs? So we sign a BAA, a subcontractor BAA with all the applications that we support. In about 1/3 of the cases, the health systems want us to sign a BAA directly with them as well. So we do that as well. So we're flexible on that, and that if the health system wants to require all subcontractors to have a BAA as well, we're happy to do that too. So we've been in multiple situations with different BAA structures. For error handling and resends, things like that, we have monitoring in place on the interfaces that we support. So on the health system side, we monitor our VPN connections into the health systems. We actually have a heartbeat that goes through that VPN, even if there's no messages that are being pushed through. So we can tell very quickly if anything's gone down. If it does, we're often the first people who calls up that health system network administrator or interface analyst to tell them that they have an outage. So we respond quickly 24/7 to any outages between the health system and the application and our Redox processing side. On the application side of it, connecting Redox to the to your application, we have automatic resends. If we get an error when we send a message to you, when we post a message to your server, we'll automatically retry 3 times before we throw an error. Once that error is thrown, we have a notification on our side. We have people on call 24/7 who receive those notifications, and we'll jump into troubleshooting. So what troubleshooting means is we might manually try to resend the message, check out what the error looks like, call up your contact at your organization to see if something's down on your side. So we see that as our responsibility to figure out why messages are failing. And once you're live in production, we have support over that. A lot of the applications that use us are used in a patient workflow setting, meaning that there might be a patient or a doctor waiting for a message to come through, and for it not to come through immediately will actually ruin a workflow. So we take that as a super high priority to make sure that messages are flowing in a efficient manner. And if there's a downtime from a message flowing through, then that's a big deal that we hop on right away. I'm going to move to this AWS question. So yes, Redox is hosted on AWS. We are hosted on it. And so if your application uses AWS, there's not really an advantage to having both of us hosted on the same in the same cloud. Obviously we will have some of the same infrastructure running, but communicating with Redox happens over web services. So it's a HTTPS connection. So regardless of where you're hosted, it's not really there's not any true benefits to that. So I'd say that probably more than half of our customers are also hosted on AWS, and really working with someone on AWS or on Rackspace or Bluehost or someone like that, communicating with them is really quite similar. From a HIPAA perspective, obviously there are pros and cons to any hosting service you provide or any subcontracted hosting service you provide. So yeah, cool. Quick time check. Looks like we have 7 minutes left, so keep the questions coming, and we'll keep going through them here. Let's see. Okay, so I want to answer Darla's question on what percentage of health systems do we have agreements with, and what are the challenges there. That's a really great question. So at Redox, our vision is to be able to provide sort of turnkey integration services. So if you sell to Cleveland Clinic, for instance, and Redox is already hooked up to Cleveland Clinic, then the more integrations that we have there and the more data we have mapped means that a more integrated turnkey integration solution exists. But we're not there yet. I mentioned that we've been around for about 2 years now. We're not hooked up to Cleveland Clinic. We're not hooked up to the majority of health systems in the country. So really the way that we approach getting new health systems on as nodes to the network is through you guys. So you guys are out there selling your products to health systems. We hope to be able to provide a service to help you connect to that health system in a more efficient manner, both efficiently for your development team as well as for the health system that you sell into. And each health system that you sell to actually adds a node to this network and allows us to integrate applications with it. So you're receiving a benefit when we're already hooked up to a health system. And when we're not hooked up to a health system, Redox actually takes that as an investment from our side. So the amount of effort that it takes us to install at that health system the first time is really something where we likely take a loss from a revenue standpoint to get you integrated that first time at that health system, because adding that health system to the network is so important to the to this approach of networked interoperability. And it looks like John asked a follow-up question here on pricing. And to talk about that a little bit, our pricing is flat regardless of the size of the organization you're hooking up to and regardless of the amount of data that you're processing through it. So additionally, the pricing is tied to the instance of the EHR that we're connected to. So you asked if one customer is a multi-hospital system, and there's 3 different modules, which I imagine are the interface subscription types. Comparing that to a small physician practice, yeah, the pricing would be the same, and that's because the cost associated with building and maintaining that interface is really the same for us. Additionally, the benefit that we get from having larger systems on the network is so much more valuable than smaller 1 and 2 doc practices, that we want to essentially incentivize our partners, you guys, your applications, to work with bigger health systems, because it allows for a more efficient sort of network effects to come about. If you're working with a very large health system that has multiple hospitals and multiple clinics associated with it, they're oftentimes using one single instance of an EHR. So if you're looking at, I used Cleveland Clinic earlier. Cleveland Clinic is a huge health system, outpatient facilities, multiple hospitals, multiple specialties. All of them are using the same instance of Epic. And what that means is hooking up to Cleveland Clinic happens once. And then regardless if you're selling to one hospital or all of their hospitals, that integration is done. And from our perspective, pricing is the same whether you're doing it to one or to many hospitals within there. So right now we're rolling with that pricing to really incentivize working with larger health systems to get more of this network on board. Let's see here. It looks like Justin asked about CCDs with Cerner. So we do support CCD interfaces, and we are supporting them with Cerner and with Epic and Athena and a couple other EHRs out there. Our CCD parser is designed to support the generalized CCD format, meaning that we should be able to support any EHR. The way that it works is we'll actually extract a CCD in its XML format from the health system and their EHR using their typical sort of continuity of care workflow, and then we parse it, turn it into a standard JSON model. So if you look in our documentation, we call this clinical summary. And so if you look at our clinical summary data model, it's our JSON version of a CCD. We have some crosswalks built in to make it more usable. And the goal is for that to be consistent regardless of the EHR you're working with or the customizations that they may have done within the EHR that customizes those CCDs. So that's definitely something that we have experience with and support currently. So you asked if they're standard from one EHR to another. They're supposed to be, but if you've ever looked at the CCD documentation, it's about a 700-page PDF that you have to download, and that's just like the suggestion for the standard. And then beyond that, each EHR vendor and each health system does things to further customize that standard. So it's really kind of a mess when you look at CCDs between different EHRs. So that's why we created our CCD parser the way that we did. And our goal is to make it so you don't have to worry about the complexities and customizations between each of those vendors. So it looks like we are running low on time here. So I just want to thank everyone for coming. We're happy to take these questions offline, the ones that we weren't able to get to. Feel free to reach out to us. Let me type some contact information into the chat box here. So actually, so if you have any follow-up questions or want to talk more, feel free to reach out to me. I'm typing my email address, and we can schedule a follow-up call. I can answer any other questions beyond that. Additionally, we have a Slack group. So if you're a Slack user, we have a community Slack where there's a bunch of people in there asking questions all day long about how to use Redox in different ways. So if you're interested in that, I'm going to put our Slack link in the chat box as well. Community. Community.redoxengine.com. Oh, I spelled it wrong. There we go, the second one. Otherwise, there are there's all sorts of different ways to communicate with us following up. So let us know if you have any other questions, and thanks for coming out. I really appreciated your guys' questions, really engaged group. And to round it out, we really do Redox to support applications who are moving the needle in healthcare. So we love hearing about the things that you're making. And it's a consistent source of inspiration and honestly the reason why we do this. So would love to hear more about what you guys are working on. So feel free to reach out and make these connections, and we'll take it from there. Thanks.